Hi, in this video I will talk about the terminology in the Schillinger system of musical composition. Most of the comments I receive are about the mathematical notation in this system, so apparently the nomenclature and the symbols used are a real stumbling block. And I must admit that it takes some familiarization when studying his techniques. Since I believe in the potential of the system, I decided to spend a video on trying to explain some of the terminology. In this episode, I will concentrate on the terminology in diatonic harmony, which is part of the Schillinger special theory of harmony. I will illustrate the definitions, I will talk about the nomenclature and the mathematical symbols used. We will start by discussing aspects of a diatonic scale. Then we'll move on to chord structures, and finally we'll talk about chord progressions, including root movement and part voice leading. You may use this video as a reference when watching episodes on my YouTube channel or reading documents from my website. Okay, let's get started. Our starting point is a diatonic scale with 7 pitches. Here, the major diatonic scale or Ionian mode. There are several ways of writing this diatonic scale on a musical staff. And that's where we meet the first terminology which is unique for the Schillinger system and which is called an expansion. The symbol used is the capital E with a subscript where the number indicates the type of expansion, the form of expansion. When we have the closest spacing of all the diatonic degrees from the scale, as is shown on the left, we say it's an expansion E0. The degrees are labeled as D1 to D7, corresponding to the tonic, supertonic, mediant, subdominant, dominant, etc. The use of the symbols E and D obviously may cause confusion, since they also are used as pitch class names. This happens quite a lot when reading the Schillinger books, and sometimes I have modified his original notation to prevent ambiguity. I try to use a consistent notation. For instance, I will use capital letters for writing chords and small caps when writing pitch names. And I use subscripts when the symbols are used in a different context. On the right of the staff, we see a different notation of the same diatonic 7-pitch scale. In this case, it is written as an ascending series of thirds. This is called the expansion E1, and this expansion turns out to be the basis of diatonic or traditional harmony, tonal harmony, which uses chords in thirds. We derive expansion E1 from the original diatonic scale in expansion E0 by skipping a degree. So we get D1, D3, D5, D7, D2, D4 and D6, which is the series of ascending thirds. The entire Schillinger book on the special theory of harmony is based on this first expansion of a diatonic scale. We may generalize this principle of writing expansions, which are derived from the original diatonic scale. And here we see the expansion number 2, which is a series of ascending fourths, and expansion E3, a series of ascending fifths. E2 is obtained by skipping 2 degrees from the original scale, so we get the sequence D1, D4, D7, etc. The total range of the expansion is now more than 1 octave, and we could go even further and derive expansion E4 and E5, which however turn out to be less practical in writing a system of harmony. The expansion E2, however, is used for building chords in fourths. In diatonic harmony, chord structure is based on the first expansion E1. On the staff, we see 2-part chord structures, dyads, and I use the symbol S for chord structure. 2p means 2 parts. The part index or part number is shown on the left, and we start from bottom to top. For the C major diatonic 7-pitch scale, we obtain a set of major and minor thirds as shown as dyads, as 2-part chord structures on the left. In case we want a different system of harmony, we could base the chord structures on a different expansion, and this is shown on the right, where we start from expansion E2, where the scale is written in fourths, and now we get dyads which consist of perfect and augmented fourths. The triad is a 3-part chord structure, and we derive the full set of 3-part chord structures from expansion E1 by always taking 3 neighboring pitches written in this expansion. This is shown on the left, where we have a set of major, minor or diminished triads. This set contains all the chords and thirds on the various degrees of the diatonic scale. As an example, let's have a look at the triad on the dominant degree D5, which is the G in C major. This triad also contains the degree number 7, which is the leading tone degree, and the D2, which is the supertonic degree, and the corresponding pitches are the B and the D for C major. Again, we can generalize this principle and construct triads in a different expansion. This is shown on the right, where we use expansion E2, the scale written in ascending fourths. Again, we build the triads from collecting 3 adjacent pitches in the scale written in this expansion. And the result is a set of 3-part chords in fourths. The 4-part chord structures in diatonic harmony are created by taking 4 adjacent pitches from the expansion E1. The result is the set of 7 chords shown here on the 7 degrees of C major, and they consist of a number of major, minor, dominant and half diminished 7 chords. For the 4-part chord structures in diatonic harmony, I use the symbol S7. An example is the 7th chord on the submedian degree, the 6th degree, which in C major is the pitch class A. This 7th chord contains the degrees D6, the submedian, D1 the tonic, D3 the median, and D5 dominant, and these correspond to the pitch classes A, C, E and G in C major. The resulting 7th chord is the A minor 7th chord. If you've been reading the information in the slides while this presentation is going on, I hope that by now you are getting somewhat familiar with the unique terminology and symbols used in the Schillinger system. The next aspect of a chord is what's called the chordal function, which is an integer number. The staff shows the 7-part chord, which we can build on the 1st degree, the tonic of the C major scale. This 7-part chord has maximum density. It contains all the pitches from the scale. The integer number on the right shows the function of the pitch within the chord. The number 1 is the root, in this case the C, which is the root of this 7-pitch chord. The E has the function of the 3rd within the chord. The G is the function 5 within this chord. The 7 belongs to the pitch B. The higher numbers correspond to the extended functions of the chord, the 9, 11 and 13, and for the 2-letter numbers we may use the equivalent integer numbers 4 and 6. Chord structures also have a certain tension, a feeling of a level of dissonance inherent with the chord. The tension is indicated by the highest chordal function in the structure. The staff shows the number of chords that we may build on the tonic degree, the C in C major. And on the left we see the triad structure, the S5, a three-part chord. And on the right we see chords that contain the chordal function 13, which is in this case the submedian degree, the A. Going from left to right, we see that there is always a higher chordal function, and in general there will be an increasing tension, a sense of less stable chords, chords that include a higher degree of dissonance. Be aware that the chord tension is indicated by the highest chordal function present in the chord, and not by the density, the number of parts within the chord. This is illustrated by showing alternative chord structures with the same tension. Have a look at the center two chords, which are both S11. The chord on the left is a 6-part chord structure and the one on the right a 4-part chord structure. Both contain the F sharp, which is the chordal function 11. So the tension is determined by this number and not by the chord density. When writing chord progressions, we have to consider the movement of the root of the chord. In the Schillinger system, this is called a root cycle, which is another piece of terminology which is unique. On the left of the staff we see the original diatonic scale written in expansion E0. This expansion, with the steps, the sequence of degrees, is used in the Schillinger system for writing a melody. We have already seen how chord structures are based on the first expansion E1 of the diatonic scale. The same, however, holds for the root movement, for the root cycles. Expansion E1 is shown once again on the right of the staff, and root movements, root cycles, may be either positive or negative. A positive root cycle implies a root movement descending down the series of thirds towards the tonic degree, in this case C, whereas negative root cycles are a movement of the root in the opposite direction, which means in the direction of ascending thirds. The original symbol C for root cycle in the Schillinger system here has been replaced by the symbol R, which is hopefully less confusing. For the 7-pitch diatonic scale there are 3 positive root cycles, R3, R5, R7. On the left we see the root cycle R3, which is a series of descending thirds, all moving downward to the tonic degree C. An example of R3 is when the root moves from C down to A. In the center we see the root cycle R5, which is the descending fifth. Here it's shown as an alternating descending ascending sequence. And as an example, this contains the dominant tonic degree movement from G to C in this case. On the right we see the third diatonic positive root cycle, which is the R7, which means the descending movement of the root by a seventh, which of course corresponds to an ascending move, a stepwise move of a second. Everyone studying traditional harmony will of course recognize the root cycle R5, the descending fifth movement of the root. However, Schillinger is generalizing this principle into 3 positive root cycles. Chord progressions with positive root cycles create strong progressions with a sense of stability. Equivalently, there may be negative root cycles, and shown here are the root movement for R-3, which means ascending thirds, and the R-5 root cycle, which means ascending fifth root movement. Note the last root movement on the right, which is from F to C, which corresponds from the fourth degree, the subdominant degree, to the tonic, which we all recognize as a plagal cadence. The use of negative root cycles leads to a weak, destabilizing chord progression. And so, a chord progression in diatonic harmony will consist of a sequence of positive and negative root cycles. We may control the feeling of stability in a chord progression by using the ratio and order of positive and negative root cycles. And in general, in a diatonic chord progression we will find more positive than negative root cycles, and typically a progression or musical phrase will close with a positive root cycle, which leads to a strong cadence. The example shows a series of 7 positive root cycles and 1 negative root cycle. It opens and closes with the tonic degree, and at the end we find a strong dominant to tonic cadence. In the center there's a special group, and this goes beyond the discussion of terminology. It's a pair of a negative followed by a positive root cycle. Note the roots moving from F to A to D, where the end effect is a downward third movement from F to D. Myself, I've always been amazed by this unique aspect of the Schillinger system, the concept of root cycles. After studying it, I've been applying this so many times when analyzing harmonic progression in masterpieces in the tonal harmony, and it always helps me in understanding what's going on in the music. So I can only recommend this concept. Try it for yourself and see if it helps you in analyzing existing music or composing your own. Now we'll have a look at the full chord progression, which contains chord structures, root movement, and voice leading for the individual parts. The example here is still based on the diatonic C major scale. We use triads only. The chord structure is S5 with the highest chordal function 5, and therefore the tension is constant in this example. Another aspect of the Schillinger theory of harmony is that we may distribute parts over a number of layers, or, as Schillinger calls them, strata. The lower layer L1 contains single pitches only, and they consist of the chord roots, which is the chordal function 1. In the upper layer we have 3-part chord structures. In this case they are the triads, which contain the root, third and fifth of the chord. So, although our source material are triads only, we have created 2 individual layers by doubling one part. The layers may fulfill a specific musical role, such as melody, harmony or bass. And in this example, the lower layer represents the role of the bass, and in the upper layer L2 we find the harmony. I will use the symbols M, H and B for these roles. Again, going beyond the discussion of terminology, this example also shows the voice leading in the layers. The voice leading principles used here are maximizing smooth stepwise motion in parts, prevent exact parallels, and crossing or overlap between neighboring parts. Since we are doubling the chordal function 1, the root, there is the danger of creating exact parallels. Inspect the red arrows and see when there is parallel motion versus contrary motion. This completes the discussion of terminology in the Schillinger system of diatonic harmony. I will revisit all these aspects by discussing two more examples of diatonic scales. In the staff on the left we see the pentatonic minor scale on the tonic degree F. On the right, the scale is expanded into expansion E1, which will be the basis for the root movements and the chord structures in diatonic harmony. The original source scale in expansion E0 contains a number of minor third and major second intervals. When expanding into E1, this yields a number of perfect fourths and one major third, as shown on the right. The green arrows illustrate positive root cycles in the descending direction and negative root cycles in the opposite direction. Note that now we have less options than in the case of a 7-pitch diatonic scale. Based on expansion E1, we obtain the full set of 2-part and 3-part chord structures for the pentatonic scale. Two neighboring pitches in the scale in expansion E1 now of course will lead to many chords in fourths. Occasionally we obtain an inverted major or minor triad, as is shown on the right for the degrees D5 and D2 respectively. The next step is to create a diatonic chord progression for this pentatonic scale, and I will show 3 alternative voicings. And here is voicing number 1. The chord progression is shown in the lower staff and consists of 5 positive root cycles, 1 negative root cycle. Sometimes we move 2 steps along the scale in expansion E1, sometimes just a single step. The chord progression contains 1 negative positive root cycle pair shown in green, and it concludes with a plagal cadence, in this case B flat to F. Chord structures here are triads, and I've distributed the pitches, the parts, over 2 layers, L1 and L2. The lower layer, which has the function of the bass, consists of the root of each chord, and the upper layer, which provides a harmonic layer, contains the other 2 pitches, P2 and P3. Note that the concept of chordal function breaks down here since we don't have chords in thirds any longer. We still have to decide on the voice leading in the upper layer L2 with the harmony, and in this case we aim for the total minimum motion in the parts. This may lead to conflicts, as is illustrated by the red arrows. On the left I've decided on contrary motion between upper and lower layer. In the middle, I've strictly adhered to the principle of minimum motion, and in this case we get parallels between all parts, and this is a weak voice leading. Remember that this video is about terminology and not about the theory of harmony, so I will not discuss alternative solutions to improve the voice leading in this example. For the same pentatonic scale and chord progression as expressed by the chord cycles, I may get a completely different voicing. This is illustrated in the score example, which again consists of 2 layers. The lower layer L1 has the role of bass, and in the upper layer L2 we find the harmony. The lower layer is identical to the previous example, but now in the upper layer we find 3-part chord structures. Using triads in the upper layer implies that we are doubling the pitch P1 in both layers. This means that there is a danger of exact parallels between parts, and this is an aspect we are trying to avoid in the voice leading. A nice side effect of the Schillinger system is that in the voice leading approach these exact parallels will be prevented, as is shown by the red arrows. Occasionally we find motion in parallel direction, but since the upper part is moving stepwise and there is a leap in the lower part, this is considered acceptable. In the third voicing shown here, two aspects have changed. First, we are doubling the pitch P2 instead of P1, and now we are creating two layers, each with two-part structures, and both fulfill the role of harmony. Why would we do this? Well, this has great instrumentation potential. Imagine that the upper layer is, for instance, the wind section of an orchestra, and the lower layer, also a harmonic layer, is assigned to the string section. We can create independent parts for all sections. This is different from the regular octave doubling of a part in an orchestral setting. Once again, the red arrows show the details of the voice leading, and here we see a very weak connection between the two opening chords, but in all other cases exact parallels have been prevented and we get an elegant voice leading. Finally, I want to illustrate what happens when the Schillinger system of diatonic harmony is applied to a modal scale. Here, the Dorian mode, the D-Dorian mode, a 7-pitch diatonic scale. On the left we see the original scale in expansion E0. On the right I've combined two expansions. I will use expansion E1, the one in thirds, for the root movements, whereas the chord structures will be based on the second expansion E2, so we will get chords in fourths. Root movement in this Dorian mode chord progression consists of 4 positive root cycles and 2 negative root cycle steps. The negative root cycles once again have been combined into negative positive root cycle pairs, and the example closes with a modal cadence R7 going from C to the tonic D. This chord example is a generalization of the Schillinger theory of harmony. Strata harmony enables us to handle the voice leading of multiple parts distributed over multiple layers. The example shows 3 layers with the role of bass in the lower layer, which is playing the chord roots. 4-part harmonic progression has been distributed over the 2 layers L2 and L3, each containing 2 parts from the structures. The 4-part voice leading was based on stepwise motion, and noticed how we have prevented the occurrence of parallels due to the doubling of the root. Both terminology and symbols from the Schillinger diatonic system of harmony have reappeared in this example, which by itself, however, is bordering on the general theory of harmony. The leader music to this video was based on this chord progression and voice leading, although reworked into a different instrumental form. This concludes the video about the terminology in the Schillinger diatonic system of harmony. I hope I have succeeded in taking away some of the confusion about the Schillinger terminology and the symbols used. Use it as a reference and revisit this material whenever you have problems understanding the terminology in my other YouTube videos. You might find the answer here. As always, thanks for watching and hope to see you back next time. Bye bye.